Hi guys, it's Debbie and today I would like to speak about T2 Trainspotting, directed by Danny Boyle. Anybody who knows me well knows how obsessed I am with its prequel, the 1996 film Trainspotting. It was a crucial movie in my teenage years and it actually ignited my passion for cinema. A couple of questions before starting the video. Number one, should I watch the first film, so Trainspotting, or would I enjoy T2 Trainspotting anyways? No. Definitely watch its prequel, the 1996 film, because T2 is heavily based on the events that take place in the first movie. It contains clips from it and a lot of facts wouldn't make any sense without seeing the first film. You just wouldn't enjoy it. Also, T2 stars the same actors as the first film and is directed by the same man, Danny Boyle, so it is interesting to see how the actors evolved artistically over 2 decades and how they maintained their old characters. Question number two. Will there be spoilers in this video? Yes, I'll be speaking about most of the features included in T2 Trainspotting, so I would highly recommend watching it before you continue seeing this video. I have read the novel Trainspotting, on which the first film is based, but I've actually never read Porno, its sequel, on which T2 Trainspotting is mainly based. So everything I'll be speaking about today is just information gathered from the movie. Okay, so the 1996 film Trainspotting was the story of 5 friends: Mark Renton, Rent Boy, portrayed by Ewan McGregor, Simon Williamson, Sick Boy, portrayed by Johnny Lee Miller, Daniel Murphy Spud, portrayed by Ewan Bremner, Francis Begbie Franco, portrayed by Robert Carlyle, and Tommy McKenzie, portrayed by Kevin McKidd. Trainspotting described their life as a group of 20-something-year-olds influenced by the use of heavy drugs, which then led them to a life of criminality and poverty, ending any relationship both with partners and with their families, and losing any hope at having a serious job and secure life. Even those of them which wouldn't take drugs would then replace them with a life of violence, such as Begbie, or would be tempted by the idea of blissful emptiness which they offered, such as Tommy. So in any case, their life was doomed by the death of those around them, the impossibility of having a normal life, and the greedy desire of always having more. The characters' lives were nothing without drugs, and they didn't even mind. Everything revolved around them. The first film ended with Renton making one last desperate attempt at escaping this life by running away with a huge amount of money he should have split with his friends. He only left a small part to Spud, which had never caused any harm. So the film left us with a happy Mark looking forwards to his new life, a furious Begbie, and desperate looking Spud and Sick Boy. T2 Trainspotting is set 20 years later, and we discover that during this time Mark Renton had been living in Amsterdam. He had stayed clean the whole time and he had actually married. The opening scene of T2 Trainspotting retraces perfectly the first film's opening, because in both movies we see Mark running while music is playing. In the first film, so 1996, Mark was escaping after stealing in a shop and was running through the streets of Edinburgh. In 2017, again, the film opens with Mark running on a treadmill. This scene and many others hint at the drastic changes that have happened in the main protagonist's life. In the first film, he was a junkie. He was barely alive, running around in filthy clothes, his veins intoxicated by any poison the streets of Edinburgh could offer. In T2, he is a new character. He wears flashy sports clothes, he works out, and also the city appears totally new to him. It has international residents, it's brighter, it's cleaner. Mark actually returns to Edinburgh because he is divorcing and he eventually meets his old friends. The problem is that in these decades that had passed, both Sick Boy and Begbie had been building up a violent hate towards Mark, because by stealing their part of money he had denied them any shot they had at a better life. As a matter of fact, Sick Boy lives a depressing life, working as a bartender in a dilapidated neighbourhood, and makes ends meet by blackmailing people, secretly filming them during sexual intercourse. He still takes heavy drugs, has lost all of his charm, and struggles to keep only one partner, Veronica. Begbie instead has been in jail for most of these 20 years and hasn't changed one bit. He is still the same violent, crazy person. He manages to escape from jail, but then just to continue his life of criminality. In my opinion, Robert Carlyle lost absolutely nothing from the first film. He was the best actor on set, perfectly conveying Begbie's violent mind and his inability to give up his life of criminality, as he is pure instinct. Renton admits he is guilty for partially ruining his friend's future, but he also points out that at the time they were all junkies which had absolutely absolutely nothing to lose, and which would have all made the same choice if they had had the chance. But Sick Boy and Begbie just can't forgive him and plan their revenge. The only childhood friend which doesn't have any anger towards Renton is Spud, whose life is actually falling to pieces. He has never stopped taking heroin. He has had a son from Gail, his girlfriend from the first film, but he hardly sees him. He lives alone in near poverty. He feels overwhelmed by his addiction and his lack of ability of getting by in an environment in which he feels ill-suited and in which he contemplates suicide as a solution to all his problems. After meeting Mark though, he feels much better, as Mark can understand him and his addiction better than any therapist, and talks him into giving up drugs and keeping his mind distracted by being addicted to something more healthy, for example sport. He insists quitting is not hard if you manage to focus your mind on something else, so Spud stops taking drugs and keeps his mind occupied by writing down his adventures in his younger years with his junkie friends, and he actually discovers he is quite talented at storytelling. The whole film is actually a continuous reference to the events that took place 20 years earlier. There are clips inserted from the first film, there are reenactments of the friends' adventures, and many shots actually retrace scenes from the first film. So for example, Mark laughing in front of a car or avoiding a particularly terrible public toilet, Sick Boy and Mark watching TV on the sofa surrounded by dozens and dozens of movies, or sliding on their knees through an imaginary stadium, or the famous scene of the walk in the countryside. Also, T2's soundtrack takes a lot from the first film. For example, we have Lust for Life by Iggy Pop, which was in the opening scene of the first film, but this time remixed by Prodigy. And instead of Born Slippy by Underworld, which was in the closing scene of the film, this time we have Slow Slippy, which is a more trippy version of the song. So as I was saying at the beginning of the video, a lot of scenes, shots and songs from T2 would make absolutely no sense without seeing the first film. For example, in T2, Mark meets Diane, a girl with which he had illegally had sex in the first film when she was a teenager. And in T2, Diane points out to Mark that Veronica might be too young for him. And in addition to many scenes in the film, the actual opening and closing of T2 retraces the first film, because in both opening scenes we have Mark running, as I said before, with the music immediately playing, and in the final scene we again have Mark as the last image we see. I found all these references perfectly inserted into the film. I don't think they were over the top, and in general I think T2 Trainspotting was awesome because of these references. It was everything I wanted and much more. It continues the friend story, but still keeping effort in their past, which in their case has been absolutely crucial in defining their future and which can't be overlooked. We also receive an explanation of the famous Choose Life quote from the first film, which we all knew was a mocking of a bourgeois life of first world commodities, washing machines, cars, compact disc players, electrical tin openers, and replacing them with the bliss induced by heroin. In T2 instead we discover that it was a catchphrase repeatedly used by the characters, making fun of a campaign against drugs which was being spread around at the time. And just as Edinburgh is changing, Mark's life is changing, the world in general is changing, even the time wasting things quoted in the first Choose Life monologue are changing and are now social media, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. The characters in the first film were absolutely clueless. They had nothing to lose, and the idea of not choosing life was a nihilistic concept of destroying everything around them and dragging everybody close to them down with them. And there was no time to stop and feel guilty and reflect, because there was always another hit just around the corner. But 20 years later, Mark still admits he has no idea about what's going on in his life. He has nothing under control, so although he isn't the junkie he used to be, the characters no longer live that F for you life in which choosing drugs or not choosing anything is better than choosing life. But they still haven't managed to move on from there. They are still clueless. They haven't got their life under control. They are still stuck in a limbo, knowing they haven't accomplished anything, that they have let everybody down in their life, and they're doing nothing to fix all of this. In T2, a series of events brings the old characters together, and they discover they are all entangled in a net of betrayals. For example, Spud never told anybody Mark had left him his part, and Sick Boy didn't tell anybody Mark had then repaid him. But friendship starts to prevail over the mistakes committed in their junkie past. For example, Sick Boy tries to fool Mark into thinking they are friends friends again, but he actually starts to enjoy spending time with his old best friend. They love speaking of the same topics, there's still a complicity between the two. When they are together, the first thought is of their junkie past and the mistakes they committed. For example, Sick Boy considers Mark guilty for giving Tommy his first hit, which then led him to an AIDS-related death. And Mark instead considers Sick Boy guilty of neglecting his daughter Dawn and causing her death. So Sick Boy will never admit it, but he understands that at the time they were just junkies with no rational thought running through their mind, and he would have made the exact same choice Mark did and steal the money. So at first he starts to spend time with Mark for his purpose, to take out his revenge on him, but then he actually starts enjoying his time with Mark. He reminisces their past, and this is the main difference between Sick Boy and Begbie. Begbie would kill Renton with his own bare hands if he had the chance. He doesn't care about his past. He does feel nostalgic when Spud starts reading out the adventures of their past, but it's not because he misses his friends, but because he feels proud of his actions, of his criminal past. So he won't stop in carrying out his revenge on Mark. Instead, I think Sick Boy is upset mostly because he always used to be better than Mark. He used to go to parties and pick up any girl he wanted. He could easily stop taking drugs whenever he liked to. He was always well dressed. He would carry out long monologues about films, about the meaning of life, while Mark was always the skinny, sexually frustrated junkie with grimy clothes. And yet he fooled them all and ran away with the money, living the life Sick Boy could only dream of. Sick Boy has lost all his beauty, his charm, his fascinating attitude, his willpower, and is greedy and jealous of Mark's successful life. Just look at Veronica, a couple of days with Sick Boy and Mark and she's already choosing the new guy. But Sick Boy would never kill Renton. He would just prefer seeing him suffer and struggling, as they all had to do in these 20 years. The film ends with both a positive and negative tone because Mark and Sick Boy have put their past behind them. Mark is back in his childhood room, Spud has found a way out of drugs, and Begbie is back where he should be, in jail, after accepting his son's life choices. But the ending also implies that these characters will never change. Sick Boy is still a depressed drug addict. Mark doesn't have his own adult life and is in his parents' house. Begbie is still a violent criminal, and Spud did exactly what Mark did years ago. Fooled them all and took the money. Also, Mark and Sick Boy proved that they have absolutely no willpower, and just speaking about heroin makes them want to take what the 1996 film called One Last Hit. So the ending of the film could be explained with another quote from the first film, which is, no matter how much you stash or how much you steal, you will never have enough. You always need to get up and do it all again. In general, T2 Trainspotting was absolutely awesome. It was everything I was expecting and much more. It was a combination of past and present, but it will still never beat the first film, and I don't think it actually planned on being better than the first film. It actually is more of a homage to the 1996 movie. There is actually one big difference between the two films, and it's not actually a negative one, but it's extremely visible, and it is the quantity of comedy, which is much more present in the second film. This could probably be justified by the fact that in the first film there was nothing actually funny in these characters' lives. They had a death sentence upon their heads. Their life was falling to pieces. But in the second film, their lives have improved. And by now, we know the characters, we know how they behave, we understand their nature, and we can actually say like, oh no, what's he going to do now? And laugh about some of their adventures. We know there's not going to be another Dawn scene. We know there's not going to be anybody dying from AIDS. But regardless of this, it still wasn't predictable. Let me know what you thought about T2 Trainspotting with a comment here below, and make sure to subscribe for many more movie related videos. See you soon, bye!